The door to the Gravel Creek land office swung open on a Monday that smelled like dust and dry lightning, the kind of morning that made the horses pull at their ties and the old men on the boardwalk squint at the sky like they were reading scripture in the clouds. Nora Hale had been awake since before dawn. She had ironed her one good blouse in the dark, guided by lamplight and the memory of her mother's hands pressing linen flat on a kitchen table 3 states and a lifetime behind her. She had tied her hair back with a piece of cord and walked the 2 miles from her wagon into town with her application folder pressed against her chest like a breastplate. The folder held everything. Survey coordinates marked in her own careful hand, a letter from the territorial assessor confirming the parcel's unclaimed status, her late husband's death certificate because she knew they would ask, proof of her 2 years of continuous occupancy on adjacent land. She had done everything right. She always did everything right. It was the one religion she had left. The office was narrow and smelled of ink and old wood, and it was already full when she arrived. Men in trail coats and broken hats lined the walls, holding papers, holding hats, holding the particular kind of patience that frontier waiting required. Nobody made room for her. Nobody was rude about it either. She was simply not visible in the way that mattered, the way that made space open up, and so she stood near the door and waited her turn and watched the clerk behind the counter work through the line with mechanical efficiency. Harlan Briggs was a man built like a fireplace, poker thin, upright, useful for one specific purpose, and liable to burn you if you touched him wrong. He had small, watery eyes behind spectacles and a mustache that looked like it was apologizing for his face. He stamped and filed and spoke in clipped declarative sentences that left no room for argument, and every man who left his counter walked out looking satisfied, or at least resigned. Nora watched him and straightened her spine. When her name was called, she stepped forward and set her folder on the counter and stated her business plainly. She was filing for title on the Hale parcel, 160 acres east of the creek bend, under the Homestead Act provisions. She had occupied adjacent land for 2 seasons, had made improvements, had surveyed the claim herself after her husband's death in the winter of '74. She slid the folder across the counter. She did not smile. She had learned long ago that smiling made men think she was asking for a favor, and she was not asking for anything except what the law owed her. Briggs opened the folder. He turned the pages with 2 fingers, slowly, the way a man turns pages when he has already decided what they say. His expression did not change. He closed the folder. He pushed it back across the counter without looking at her. His voice when he spoke was not cruel, which was somehow the worst part. It was simply administrative. He said that the land office of Gravel Creek County could not process a homestead application filed by an unattached woman. Local convention, he said, held that a deed required a male head of household to bear legal title. He said she was welcome to return with a husband or a male relative of legal age who could file in his name. He said it the way a man says the post closes at 4 as though it were weather, as though it were gravity, as though there were no human being on the other side of the words. Nora did not flinch. This was the thing about her that people consistently underestimated the distance between what hit her and what showed. Her hands tightened on the counter's edge, the knuckle of her right thumb went white, but her chin lifted, and her eyes stayed level, and when she spoke, her voice did not shake. She asked Briggs if he was aware that the Homestead Act of 1862 made no provision barring women from filing claims. She asked him what legal statute he was citing when he used the phrase local convention. She asked these questions with the measured cadence of someone who had rehearsed them at 3 a.m. by lamplight, who had considered every possible response and prepared for all of them. Briggs looked at her for one flat moment, and then reached across the counter and took her application folder and tore it in half. He tore it in half the way you'd tear a piece of bread, clean, decisive, without ceremony. He dropped the 2 halves on the counter between them and told her good day. The room went quiet. Not silent, the building still creaked, and the wind still pressed against the clapboard siding, but the human noise stopped. The men along the walls were looking at their boots or at the ceiling or at a point in the middle distance that required no moral engagement. Nora stood very still. She looked at the torn halves of 2 years of work and careful documentation, and she felt something move through her chest like a cold current underwater, deep and fast and invisible from the surface. She reached out and picked up both halves of the application and held them against her chest. She turned toward the door. She would not give Harlan Briggs or any man in that room the satisfaction of watching her face. She was 4 steps from the door when the voice behind her said, simply and without particular drama, that there seemed to be some confusion. She stopped. The voice said it again, louder this time, and she heard the sound of someone pushing away from the wall and the slow, deliberate creak of boot heels on a plank floor. She turned. He was not what she would have described as large, though he filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with size. He was lean and trail-worn, somewhere in his middle 30s, with a face that looked like weather had tried to do something to it and given up. He had dark eyes that moved with a careful economy, taking in the room the way a man takes in a landscape he might need to escape noting exits, obstacles, distances. He had been standing near the back of the line when she arrived. She had not looked at him. She had not looked at anyone. He was looking at her now, and then he looked at Briggs, and something in his expression settled into a stillness that was almost more unsettling than anger. He said his name was Callum Rowe. He said he was sorry to have kept his wife waiting. He said it the way a man says something he has decided on, not the way a man says something he is trying out flat and certain and undecorated. He walked to the counter and stood beside Nora and put his hand on the counter's edge a few inches from her torn application. He did not touch her. He looked at Briggs with those quiet, careful eyes and said he would like his wife's application processed now. He said the word wife a second time, and it sounded different the second time, heavier, more deliberate, as though he were pressing a seal into wax. Nora Hale stood perfectly still and looked at the side of this stranger's face and felt the cold current in her chest shift direction. Briggs stared. Around the room, the men who had been studying the middle distance were now studying the 2 people at the counter with a focused attention they had not offered to Nora's humiliation. Briggs said slowly that he had not seen this man with the woman when she came in. Callum said he had ridden in behind her and gotten turned around at the livery. His voice was patient in the way a creek is patient it would get where it was going, regardless. He said he had the relevant documentation and asked what the office required to proceed. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper, some document, she did not know what, and placed it on the counter beside the torn halves of her application. He did not look at her. He was watching Briggs with the settled, unmoving attention of a man who was prepared to stand there as long as the situation required. Nora had 2 choices. She could say something. She could step back from the counter, turn to this stranger, and with 3 words dismantle whatever he was trying to build. She thought about doing it. She thought about the particular satisfaction of refusing rescue, of walking out of that room on her own 2 feet and her own terms. She had done it before. She was good at it. She had made it a point of pride and a survival strategy so thoroughly interwoven that she sometimes could not tell which was which anymore. She looked at the torn halves of her application on the counter. She looked at Briggs, who had a look on his face now that was something between irritation and recalculation. She thought about the parcel east of the creek bend, the way the light came across it in the late afternoon, the way the soil turned dark when she dug into it, and known the way you know certain things in your body before your mind catches up that it was good land. Her land. She faced forward. She said nothing. She let the silence hold. Briggs looked at Callum Rowe for another long moment. Then he picked up the 2 halves of Nora's application and, without comment, began looking for a fresh form. Outside, the wind pushed a curtain of grit across the main street of Gravel Creek, and the horses at the rail pulled at their ties, and the sun hammered down on the flat Kansas plain like it was making a point about permanence. Inside the land office, a woman who had promised herself she would never need saving stood beside a stranger who had just changed both their lives with 9 words, and neither of them said a single thing to the other until the forms were stamped and signed and official. And then they walked out into the light, side by side, not touching, not speaking, carrying the particular weight of something that could not be undone. Nora stopped on the boardwalk. The street was busy with the ordinary business of a frontier. Monday, a loaded wagon grinding past, 2 men arguing outside the feed store, a dog investigating something near the trough. Callum stopped beside her. He put his hat back on his head and looked at the street and said nothing. She held the stamped application against her chest with both hands. She turned and looked at him directly for the first time. His profile was unremarkable except for the quality of its stillness. He did not look like a man waiting for gratitude. He did not look like a man expecting anything at all, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. She asked him what he thought he was doing. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, considering. He said he thought he was fairly clear on that. She said she had not asked for help. He said he reckoned she hadn't. She waited for him to say something else, and he didn't. She asked him what he wanted in return and watched his jaw tighten slightly, a small movement, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking. He said he didn't want anything. She told him that was an answer men gave right before they told you what they actually wanted, and she did not have the patience for the roundabout version. He turned and looked at her then, fully, the careful dark eyes taking in her face with the same methodical attention he'd given the room inside. He said she was probably right that most men worked that way. He said he was not in a position to argue with her on the general principle. He said he saw something that was wrong, and he did something about it, and he was not asking her to be grateful, and he was not asking her for anything, and that was the entire sum of it. She looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than either of them intended. Then she said the land office now believed they were married. He said yes. She said that was a problem they had created together, even though she had not been consulted. He acknowledged this. She asked what he proposed to do about it. He said that was up to her. She told him she was not going to lose that land claim, because a clerk did bookkeeping on the back end and found no record of a marriage. He said no, she wouldn't. She asked what that meant. He said it meant that if she needed it to be real, it could be real, and that was her call to make, and he would live with whatever she decided. The wagon ground past again. The dog found what it was looking for near the trough. The sun did not relent. Nora Hale had not planned on a husband. She had not planned on needing one, which was different, and she had organized the last 3 years of her life around the fact of her own sufficiency, with a rigor that was just barely this side of desperate. She thought about the land east of the creek bend. She thought about the way Briggs had torn her application without ceremony. She thought about the fact that this man beside her had not touched her, had not smiled at her, had not made her feel rescued in the particular suffocating way that rescue usually felt. She thought about all of these things in the space of 4 seconds. She said they should probably talk about terms. He said all right. She said she would not be managed. He said he was not interested in managing anyone. She said she would not be told what to do on her own land. He said it would be her land, and she could do what she liked on it. She said she needed to be clear that this was a practical arrangement and nothing else. He said he understood that. She said if it turned out he was the kind of man who said he understood things he didn't actually understand, she would know within 2 weeks. He said that seemed fair. She turned back to the street and began walking toward the livery where her wagon was hitched. After a moment she said he had better come. There was work to do. He came. The road east out of Gravel Creek cut through flat land that seemed to go on forever in every direction, the sky too big and too blue above it, the grass pressing flat against the wind in long, slow waves. They rode without talking, Nora on the wagon bench with the reins, Callum on his horse a length behind. The land opened up the way it always did when you got past the edge of town, past the smell of industry and habitation, into the open space where the wind had room to do its work. Nora breathed it in. She breathed in the dust and the grass and the particular cold edge underneath the warmth that meant the season was still turning, and she did not look back. The parcel east of the creek bend came into view around mid-morning. It was not impressive in the way that impressed people from somewhere else, no dramatic formations, no visible water, nothing to make a man pull his horse up and say something about the view. It was just land, wide and flat and quiet, with a shallow drainage hollow running along its eastern edge where the grass grew darker and taller, and a low rise to the north that caught the afternoon light in a way that turned the grass gold. Nora had been watching this land for 2 seasons. She knew where the soil went heavy and where it drained fast. She knew which corner flooded first in a hard rain and which direction the wind hit hardest in November. She had walked every acre of it. She had decided on it the way you decide on a thing you mean to keep. She stepped down from the wagon and walked to the nearest edge of the claim and stood there with her arms at her sides. Callum rode up beside her and stopped and sat his horse without speaking. He looked at the land the way she expected most men to look at it, registering what was there rather than what it could be. And then she watched him look a second time, more slowly, and she revised that assessment slightly. He asked how deep the topsoil ran. She told him. He asked about the water table. She told him that too. He sat quiet for a moment and said it was good land. He said it without embellishment, as though it were simply an observed fact, and something in the plainness of it settled in her chest like a stone finding the bottom of still water. She said there was a shelter frame started on the northwest corner. He asked if she'd built it. She said she had started it before she realized the posts were going to need to be deeper to hold against winter wind, and she had stopped to reassess. He nodded. He said they should probably take a look at it. He stepped down from the horse and tied it to the wagon wheel and walked out toward the northwest corner, and she walked beside him, and neither of them commented on the fact that this was the first time they had walked in the same direction on purpose. The frame was rougher than she wanted him to see. It was the work of a woman alone with a hand auger and a maul and sheer stubbornness, and it showed. 3 of the 4 corner posts were set, but the cross members were uneven, and one of the posts had a tilt to it that would matter in a strong wind. She stood beside it and watched him examine it without apology. He crouched down and looked at the post base, and she waited for something criticism, the particular mansplaining cadence of a man explaining a problem to someone he assumed hadn't identified it. He said the frost line would go deeper than these holes before January. She said she knew that. He asked how far down she'd gotten before the soil changed consistency. She told him. He nodded and stood up and looked at the frame from a distance and said if they reset the corner post to the right depth and sistered the beam joints, they'd have something that could hold through February. He said without remarking on it. She noticed. She said they would need timber. He said he'd seen a stand of cottonwood along the south draw that might work for rough framing. She said cottonwood was soft and they'd want something harder for the load-bearing elements. He said she was right and asked if she'd priced lumber in town. She said Garvey's mill had decent Douglas fir at a price that was going to require careful accounting given her current situation. He was quiet for a moment and then said he had some money. She turned and looked at him. He was still looking at the frame, not at her. He said it wasn't much, but it was enough for a timber order and whatever hardware they needed. She asked where a drifting cowboy got enough money for a timber order. He said he'd done a cattle drive up from Texas in the spring, got paid in Dodge City, hadn't spent much. He said it plainly, no show in it. She looked at the frame for a moment. She thought about terms. She said if he put in money, she would account for every cent and pay him back from the first year's income off the land. He started to say something. She said she was not negotiating on that point. He closed his mouth. He said all right. She said they should measure what they needed, and she had a notebook in the wagon. She walked back to the wagon, and he walked beside her, and the wind came across the plain in a long, flat sweep and pushed the grass in every direction at once, and the sky above them was enormous and without apology, the way the Kansas sky always was, as though it had decided permanence was the only honest position. That night she made camp on the claim for the first time as its legal occupant. The application was stamped and in her possession, and the land was hers by law and by the declaration of a man she had known for 6 hours. She built the fire herself, efficiently, the way she built everything, no wasted motion, no ceremony. She cooked beans and salt pork in the one good pan and split it between 2 tin plates without comment. Callum sat on the opposite side of the fire and ate without complaint and without performance. He did not try to talk. She found that she did not mind the silence the way she had expected to. His silence had a different quality than most silence she'd experienced around men. It was not the silence of a man ignoring her, nor the silence of a man waiting for an opening. It was simply the silence of a man who had nothing to say yet and saw no reason to manufacture something. The fire burned down slow. The plains at night went very dark and very wide, and the stars above them were the kind of stars you only got far from town, extravagant and indifferent, and completely indifferent to anything happening below them. An owl moved through the dark somewhere to the north, a soft displacement of air. Nora banked the fire and said she was going to sleep and that he could bed down on the near side of the wagon and she would be on the far side. He said that was fine. She went around the wagon and lay down on her bedroll and looked up at the sky through the spokes of the wheel and listened to the enormous quiet of the open plain and thought about the land east of the creek bend that was hers now, legally, irreversibly, and about the stranger on the other side of the wagon who had made it so. She thought about owing him. She thought about the particular weight of obligation, how it pressed differently than gratitude, how it required more accounting. She thought about terms and repayment schedules and keeping the geometry of the arrangement clean and uncomplicated. She listened to the fire settle and the wind move through the grass. She did not think about the way he had said the word wife a second time, pressing it into place. She was very deliberate about not thinking about that. She was asleep before the coals went gray. Morning on the claim came in sideways and pale, the light arriving before the warmth did, touching the top of the grass first and working down. Nora was up before it fully arrived, had water on for coffee and was reviewing her materials list by the time Callum's silhouette appeared around the side of the wagon. He had his hat in one hand, and his hair was unruly in the way of a man who had slept outside and did not perform his morning. He looked at the coffee, and she handed him a cup without ceremony, and he took it, and stood and looked east at the land while it came visible in the spreading light. She watched him do this for a moment without intending to, and then looked back at her notebook. She said they needed to talk about a division of labor. He said, all right. She said she had 3 immediate priorities: getting the shelter frame reset, turning the first acre for late-season planting, and getting a well assessment done on the south edge of the claim, where she suspected there was water within 20 feet. He said he could handle the post resetting and the structural work on the frame. She said she would handle the turning and the assessment. He said she needed 2 people for the post setting. The soil was too compact to do it alone with any speed. She looked at him. He looked at the land. He was not wrong. She said fine, they would do the post together first and then split. He said that made sense. She said she was going to start immediately. He said he reckoned they both were. They worked through the morning without significant conversation. The work had its own language, the placement of a tool, the angle of a body, the pause that meant hold while the other adjusted, and they found it quickly, the way people sometimes do when both of them know what they're doing and have no ego invested in being seen knowing. He set posts with an economy of movement she respected without commenting on. She read the soil as they dug and called the depth adjustments, and he made them without argument. They were not graceful together, not yet. But they were not inefficient either, and by midday they had reset 3 of the 4 corner posts, and the tilt was gone from the problematic one, and the frame had the squared, deliberate look of something that intended to stand. She brought out the noon meal from the provisions in the wagon hardtack and dried apple and the last of the previous night's beans, cold now, and they sat in the shade of the wagon and ate. The sun was high and direct, and the plain shimmered at the edges with heat. A red-tailed hawk worked the updrafts over the hollow to the east, its circles wide and patient and efficient. Callum watched it for a while. She watched him watch it. She thought about asking him something. She thought about the fact that she knew essentially nothing about this man, except that he was capable and quiet, and had done something irrevocable on her behalf without asking permission. She thought about the shape of that, the dimensions of it, what it meant about him, what it required of her. She asked him where he was from. He said, west of here, originally. She waited. He said Texas, before that a few other places. She asked what brought him to Gravel Creek. He was quiet for a moment. He said he had been moving in a direction, and Gravel Creek was where the direction ran out for now. She looked at him. She thought about asking what he was moving away from. She thought about the fact that she had things she moved away from too, and that she did not want those things asked about, and she left the question where it was. The hawk found what it was looking for, and folded and dropped, and the plane went back to its ordinary stillness, and they went back to work. By the 3rd day, the frame was fully reset and cross-membered, and Nora had turned half the first acre and identified 2 likely well sites from the way the soil changed moisture and composition along the southern edge. By the 3rd day, she also knew certain things about Callum Rowe that she had not been told, but had learned through the particular education of shared labor. She knew he favored his left hand for precision work, but defaulted to his right for force. She knew he did not like to work without knowing the full plan, but would execute partial information without complaint if she asked him to wait on the explanation. She knew he drank his coffee black and did not eat much, and took breaks that were brief and functional.